Dear students, I welcome you once again to this class on business law. We have been discussing about free consent, and in the previous video we had discussed about coercion, which is against free consent, and in this video we will be discussing about undue influence. So undue influence is something in which one party influences another party to enter into a particular contract. Okay, so one person has a control over the other person, or a dominance over the other person. So according to the Indian Contract Act 1872, section 16 of the Contract Act says that uh, undue influence exists when the relations subsisting between the parties are such that one party is in a position to dominate the will of the other party and uses that position to obtain an unfair advantage over the other. So one person dominates another person or influences another person and gets his job done, maybe gets a unfair advantage over the other person. So basically undue influence is a moral coercion. Okay, we discussed about coercion earlier. So coercion is actually physical, physical harm to creating physical harm to someone. So this undue influence is kind of a moral pressure created on the other party who is the victim. So it also includes, undue influence also includes coercion, compulsion, or compelling someone to do something, or menace, or threatening someone, or persuasion, or persuading someone to do something. So when we talk about the essentials of undue influence, what are the essential elements which need to be seen in a case of undue influence, or whatever we saw in the definition? So there should be a relation subsisting between the parties in which one of the parties should be in a position to dominate the will of the other. Okay, so there should be a relation between the parties. And the second one is the object or the objective of that particular undue influence is to take advantage over the other, or unfair advantage over the other regarding some aspects. And third one, the dominant party uses his dominant position to obtain that unfair advantage over the other. So these are the three essential elements which we could see in a case of undue influence. So a person is in a position to dominate the will of another. So what are the situations in which a person is in a position to dominate the will of the other? So where he holds a real or apparent authority over the other. So where one person has an authority over the other. Secondly, where two people are into a fiduciary relationship with one another. So we'll be discussing about fiduciary relationship in the coming slide. And thirdly, where he makes a contract with a person whose mental capacity is temporarily or permanently affected, maybe due to age, old age, or illness, or mental or bodily distress. Okay, so in these three cases, we can identify that a person is in a position to dominate the will of another person. What are the fiduciary relationships? Here we have mentioned 6 fiduciary relationships wherein the domination or the undue influence is already presumed in that particular relationship, or it is already there, or it is automatically presumed. If in case there is no case of undue influence, it is automatically presumed that the particular contract was due to undue influence. So those are the 6 fiduciary relationships here. Firstly, we see that the relationship between a parent and a child. Okay, so a parent and a child, this relationship comes under fiduciary relationship, wherein a parent may influence a child, or a child may influence a parent during old age. Okay, so in these cases also, if in case a contract is being formed, so it is presumed that there was an undue influence in that contract. Secondly, a relationship between trustee and a beneficiary. Okay, a trustee and a beneficiary, or for example, trustee may influence a beneficiary regarding some aspect of a contract. And thirdly, a guardian and a ward. So wherein a guardian may influence a ward. And fourthly, we have spiritual master and a disciple, wherein a spiritual master may influence or morally influence a disciple to do something or not to do something. Okay, so there is a undue influence in that case. Fifthly, we have lawyer and a client. So lawyer may influence a client, maybe positively or negatively. Finally, we have doctor and patient. A doctor may influence a patient, wherein they can get into a contract with each other. So it might be due to undue influence. So in these 6 cases, the domination or undue influence is already presumed. Okay, but in the coming 3 cases, when we see the relationship between husband and wife, landlord and tenant, and creditor and debtor. So in these 3 cases, the undue influence has to be proved in court of law. Okay, so husband may or may not influence a wife. A wife may or may not influence a husband. A landlord may or may not influence a tenant. A tenant may or may not influence a landlord. A creditor may or may not influence a debtor. A debtor may or may not influence a creditor. Okay, in these 3 cases, if in case a contract has been formed, the case of undue influence has to be proved by the victim or the aggrieved party in a court of law. So these are the fiduciary relationships when we talk about undue influence. So what is the difference between coercion and undue influence? Okay, coercion is actually through physical force or through harming someone. Okay, uh, but undue influence is through moral pressure built on someone. Okay, pressure which is established on someone to do something. Okay. Secondly, when we see coercion need not proceed from the promisee or need not be directed against a promiser. Okay, it may be from a third party. It may be directed towards a third party. But in case of undue influence, there should always be a relationship subsisting between 2 parties. Okay, there should be a relationship between the 2 parties. So it is between those 2 parties. It is directed to either of the parties, or no, it is proceeding from either of the parties. And thirdly, contract which is forming out of coercion is voidable at the option of of either of the parties. When you talk about undue influence, a contract which is formed through undue influence may become voidable again, like coercion, may become voidable at the option of either of the parties, or it may be set aside by the court of law. So these are the differences between coercion and undue influence. So what are the situations in which we may suspect a case of undue influence? So in cases wherein a contract which is formed wherein the consideration was found inadequate, or a proper consideration was not being provided by either of the party. In that case, we might suspect a case of undue influence. Secondly, wherein inequality of parties was understood, where in cases of age or intelligence or social status. So if for example, if there was a contract between age of 20 and another person was age of 60, so there might be a chance in which undue influence had played its role. And when we talk about social status, where one person was of higher status and one person was of lower status, there might be a chance in which undue influence was, we can suspect undue influence in that case. And thirdly, if there was a fiduciary relationship, as we discussed in the previous slide, if there was one of the fiduciary relationship between the parties. And fourthly, if in cases of Pardanashan women, where women wear parda, and these women are said to be controlled by other people or men. So in these cases where Padhanashin women come into play in a contract, we might suspect a case of undue influence. And finally, in cases wherein unconscionable bargains are made in a contract, or wherein consideration against conscience, or illegal consideration, or something opposed to public policy or against conscience of a person. So in that case, we might suspect a case of undue influence. And finally, what is the effect of undue influence, or the consequences of undue influence once it has been confirmed? So, contract may become voidable at the option of either of the parties, or the court may set it aside, or it may not, or it might ignore the case. So, these are the effects of undue influence. So in this video, we discussed about undue influence, which is against free consent, one of the very important elements of a contract. So I hope this video content was useful to you. If you would have liked this video content, please like the video, and do subscribe to my channel. Also share this video with your friends. So thank you so much, students, for listening. Thank you.